Welcome to Season 3 of DTBY's Community Podcast, hosted by the CYC.
We are a movement dedicated to inspiring, mentoring, and building the leadership qualities of tomorrow's leaders. This season, we are connecting youth to professionals, mentors, and community leaders who possess specialized knowledge and experience in areas relevant to youth resilience and safety. By leveraging the expertise of these individuals, we hope to empower youth with information and insights that are vital for their well-being and security.
Before we introduce this episode's guest, we would first like to offer a land acknowledgement.
Although this gathering is virtual, we recognize that DTBY convenes on the treaty lands of the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation and the traditional territory of many nations, including the Haudenosaunee and the Huron-Wendat peoples, also serving as home to many diverse First Nations, Inuit, and Métis peoples.
At the Dare to Be Youth charity, we are proud to promote the spirit of helping, sharing, and caring for our neighbors without the expectation that has been exemplified by each of these nations as the first peoples of this land for thousands of years. And we wish to acknowledge our gratitude for the ongoing opportunity to live, work, and build community on this land.
It is our collective responsibility to care for each other, to care for these lands. And it is past time to turn reflection into action. We challenge ourselves and everyone here today to commit to one tangible next step to move this work forward.
Welcome back to DTBY's Ask the Expert podcast, and welcome to our third episode of our third season. My name is Michaela, and I will be the host for this episode. And on behalf of DTBY, it is our pleasure to welcome Adrianna, a lawyer specializing in business law at Ross McBride LLP in Hamilton. Thank you so much for joining us today, Adrianna.
Thank you for having me. I'm excited to be here.
So to start, for anyone watching or listening that doesn't know you, can you give us a little background on who you are?
Yeah, so like you mentioned, I am a business law lawyer at Ross McBride in Hamilton. We're Hamilton's oldest and largest law firm, covering most areas of law. And like you said, I particularly do business law. So helping people set up their businesses, buy and sell businesses, with contracts. So, making sure they're properly protected when they're entering into relationships with other businesses, partners, landlords, things like that. So really most areas of business law.
Very cool. And can you tell us a little bit about your journey to becoming a lawyer? Like, is this something you always saw yourself doing, or did it kind of change along the way?
Yeah, I think I knew from a fairly young age that I wanted to be a lawyer. I think I was one of those kids that people said, you should be a lawyer, which I truly just think is something they say to kids who try to negotiate their own punishments. But anyways, it was set from a pretty young age, which was great in some ways because the trajectory was always set. So I always knew the next thing that I was working towards, but it was also a little bit stressful because there was really no backup plan if things didn't go well, but thankfully they did. As for schooling, I started at Brock University. I got my undergrad in sociology with a criminology concentration. So thought I wanted to be a criminal law lawyer. I went to law school at the University of Ottawa. And then I came back home to article. So I articled here at Ross McBride. Articling is basically kind of like the internship year that you do before you officially become a lawyer. So I got a lot of business law exposure during that year. I come from a family of business owners, so it seemed like it was a natural fit for me. And I was hired by the business group here, and I've been here ever since. So almost 6 years.
It's amazing that you kind of found your home right after you finished school. So kind of like while you were in undergrad or maybe even in law school, what would you say were some of the biggest challenges you faced?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of challenges. It's hard to point to a specific one. I would say the biggest overall challenge, which I think it can be related to a lot of different schooling programs, but especially something like law school, it's a very intense program. So it's a lot of schoolwork. And on top of that, there's a lot of pressure to, volunteer, get involved in groups, apply for jobs on top of a very rigorous school program. So never honestly felt like there was enough time in the day, and you could have a very stressful week. So a lot of assignments due or things like that. And then there's also things happening in your personal life, because that obviously doesn't stop just because you're in a stressful school program. So the combination of all of that could be very overwhelming at times. So I would say that's the most general challenge that I faced during that year. There was obviously more specific ones in particular moments, but that was the biggest overall challenge.
Mhm. And then how would you say you like overcame those challenges of being in like such a rigorous program and trying to keep your grades up while even like maintaining like your mental health, your social life,
Yeah.
all those like good things?
Yeah. I mean, I think there's a few different ways, some more practical than others. The one that sounds a little bit trivial, but is probably the most helpful, is just making sure that you keep a good mindset. So for me, I'm a firm believer everything happens for a reason, and it usually works out for the best. So, reminding yourself of that in the moments that are stressful really helped me a lot. I mean, that C that I got in law school in first year in one of those classes that I thought would be the end of the world, at the end of the day, it didn't prevent me from getting the job that I wanted. And I learned a lot from it. So it's in those moments that are really stressful, I think it's just helpful to remember that it's just a moment in time, and that it in the bigger picture, things will usually work out. Even just reminding yourself that everything is temporary. So if you're pulling all-nighters and you're in exam week, that's not going to last forever. That's a moment of time. You will get through it. You've done it before, and you'll come out the other side. So I would say generally that's one of my big ones. More practically, just being prepared throughout the semester. So especially for law school, there's a lot of classes that are 100% finals. So you could theoretically do nothing all year and then show up and write the exam. But I would say those of us who prepared through the semester, doing your readings, going to class, they would say we probably found that a little bit easier.
Mm-hmm.
And then, like you mentioned, with the whole social life thing, I would say friends are a huge part of law school. And that's one of my main recommendations, is find a really good group and don't be afraid to ask for help. So it can be a weirdly competitive environment. And I think it's probably one of my main recommendations, is find a good group that you can trust and really support each other. So share the workload for sure, but also just be there for each other. One of my best friends to this day. So it's, you can't be afraid to reach out and rely on other people. Again, it can be a little bit of a weirdly competitive environment. And I think for those of us who were able to put that aside and really make great friends, it made the world of a difference. And my friends and I have this saying that law school is like the best nightmare we ever had, because it was honestly some of the best and most fun years of my life, while also being stressful. And that's because of the people that you spend it with.
Mm-hmm. I was gonna say, like, they almost don't tell you about like undergrad, and I'm sure like law school is the same. Like it is pretty much too much work to do all alone. Like the people that do well are the people that could like collaborate with like other people in their class and can like kind of like split the readings. Because I know like just like in first year of my undergrad program, like the reading was too much for like one person to be on top of. So it's really beneficial if you can kind of like make those friends and like kind of split the readings, and like you can trust that that person is like making good notes for you and you can collaborate that way. And I also found just like taking things like one day at a time is all you can really do when you're in like peak midterm season. Like just focusing on like a day at a time, like this is what I got to do today, tomorrow will be tomorrow. And then I found that was a good way to kind of like keep my stress levels down as well during undergrad. But it definitely is a challenging time for people like the first year of undergrad, and I'm sure even like the first year of law school. There's a lot of trial and error, and then you probably not do that good on some exams, but that's okay. Like one bad exam, one bad project is not gonna really affect you long term, even though it really could really feel like it.
Yeah. And like I said, you learn from it. And I think that's the most important thing too, right? Like I remember that one exam in first year that was terrible. And I learned so much from that experience. I think during the semester, I already knew I was struggling, and I didn't reach out in the ways that I probably should have to my professor or to other students or whatever it was. And I learned to be a lot more proactive. Like I said, asking for help. I learned to be a lot more proactive from that. And I also learned how to study differently, especially in classes that were mandatory classes that I didn't want to be taking or that I didn't particularly naturally understand. And I figured out from that how to go forward and change my approach. And so I'm grateful for that see now, although in the moment it felt like the world was ending, but it didn't.
So now having like been through your undergrad, been through those rigorous years of law school, and now having become a lawyer, what would you say is worth it? Like, what's the favorite part of your job now?
Yeah, I would say for me, it's definitely worth it. It's what I always wanted to do. There's a lot of very rewarding parts of it. The Like I said, I come from a family of business owners, so being involved in those moments with clients is really special. So I find that very rewarding, whether they're starting a business, the excitement of that, or if they're retiring or selling their business after 40 years, getting to be involved in those moments is really special. So that's probably my favorite part of what I do now. Um, I also find just specifically with business law in particular, it's fairly happy law. So, it doesn't mean there's not tense moments or that we aren't negotiating or doing things like that, but we're typically working towards something positive rather than having to try to resolve a dispute. So that works better from my personality type. So that's probably my favorite part about the type of law that I do.
Mhm. And then I guess kind of as a follow-up question to that, for anyone like interested in pursuing business law, what would you say your day-to-day looks like? Or is it always changing or
Very much
yeah.
changing. I mean, that's kind of a loaded question. It can depend on the time of year, depend on the market. I mean, if there's weeks where we may have one major transaction that we're working on, so buying or selling a business, and that transaction itself will make up most of my week or a lot of my week. And then there's seasons where there's not a lot of transactional work happening just because of the market. So that can change. And so then it's different type of work. And in the end of the year, towards Christmas season, a lot of companies have their financial year end at the end of December. So that makes the end of the year fairly busy for us with tax related work and tax planning, as well as transactional work, because not going to get into it, but there's just with that year end, there's a lot of corporate types of events that need to happen simultaneously with the year end. So that can make the end of the year a little bit busy, but I like it because every day is different for the most part. So whether it's drafting shareholders agreements or, like I said, transactional work, reviewing commercial leases, it really depends on the day.
Mhm. And then how do you maintain balance in your life during those busy periods at like year end and other times?
Yeah. I mean, it's hard. It's definitely for the year as a whole, I would say it's a choice that you can somewhat make. That has to be qualified, obviously. I'm at a firm that on the whole really, really respects work-life balance, which I very much appreciate. But that doesn't mean that there aren't moments where the job has to take over. Like I said, if we're dealing with a really big transaction or at the end of the year, and I think in those moments, I have to remind myself that I'm a far better lawyer when I take the breaks that I need, when I step away and I come back with fresh eyes and a clear head. So again, harping back to what I said before, asking for help when you need it, if you really need it, and making sure that you do take the breaks to get through those hard times, just like I mentioned with law school. I mean, as the year on a whole, so that's really in those intense, busy moments. For the job as a whole, I mean, I think you have that's a little bit more in your hands on making a choice that you're going to respect work-life balance. So you can get pretty caught up in the expectations for your career or from clients or even financially. And I think it's helpful to remember, like with any career, that, I'm a lawyer as my job title, but that's not who I am or remotely the most important thing about me. So, I love my job and I take it very seriously, especially in those intense moments where there's deadlines and things like that. But I never will get to go back to the years when my nephew was 3 years old. And so I have to enjoy that while I can. And so I would say on a whole, it's making a choice to have that balance. And again, it's easier said than done in certain situations. But I try to make sure that it's something that I prioritize. And that was the same in law school as well.
Yeah, I definitely think that's very good advice for like the young listeners watching, because if you're gonna go to school, like it's unavoidable. Like you're gonna be busy. You're gonna be really busy sometimes, and there's like no way to get out of it. But like you said, like taking those breaks and knowing that you perform better when you're able to like take those breaks and come back, and then also like maintaining your relationships with like your family, even your friends is really important. I know once people like graduate high school, it's kind of hard to keep in contact with friends and kind of like maintain those relationships, but at the end of the day, it is worth it to like put in the effort to keep those connections strong, and it's worth it for you, it's worth it for them, and it definitely does, like having a good circle around you definitely does take the stress out of busy times for sure.
Absolutely. So you can't let that part of you totally die to facilitate school or job or anything like that. It has to be. Then, like I said, there's moments where it does take over, but on the whole, you have to make sure you're prioritizing yourself, your mental health, your physical health, all of that, your family relationships, other types of relationships, all of that.
Mhm. And for our final question, beside that kind of advice to like maintain a good work-life
Yes.
balance, what other advice would you give to any young people considering a career in law right now?
So yeah, I would say that, like you said, that's an important one that we just talked about. More practically, I would say volunteer in the industry. So I was nervous when I was in high school and when I was an undergrad. Like I said, I already knew I wanted to go to law school. I knew I wanted to be a lawyer, but I was pretty nervous to reach out to volunteer at law firms or anything like that, I wouldn't know what I was doing, which of course not, nor do we expect you to. So I did end up working at a law firm in the summers when I was in law school, and that experience was extremely valuable. You get to see how a firm works, the different areas of law, so you get some exposure to that, meet people in the industry. And honestly, just law is so different in practice than it is in law school. So it's a big recommendation to try and get into a firm. And even if you're just photocopying, you will pick things up just from hearing the lingo and seeing what people do and how they interact and all of that. So it's something that I wish I would have started earlier. So that's a big one. Again, we talked a little bit about it, but I caution people from going into law for, the so-called prestige or the money or anything like that, because it can be a really long and hard, expensive journey to go through. So I would say do it because you are genuinely interested in the work and that you think you'll enjoy it, rather than just, what you think you might get out of it. So that's a big one. And then lastly, and this is for any job, whether it's law school or a job in any real field, show up to whatever you do with your best foot forward. So on time, with good attitude, ready to work. It's really those little things outside of the actual job itself that set you apart and make a pretty big difference.
Yeah, good advice all around. And I think it's even applicable to people not considering a career in law. Like you should go into a job that you're passionate about, not just for the money. And then, yeah, just you gotta try your best at anything you do. And hopefully you'll get the results you want. But I think, yeah, Very good advice. So on that note, that concludes this episode of DTBY's Ask the Expert podcast. On behalf of DTBY, I would like to thank you for opening up about your journey to becoming a lawyer and giving students considering this field a little inside scoop of what potentially waits for them on their own journey. So thank you for coming again, and thank you to everyone who tuned in to this episode. You could follow us on social media to stay up to date on when new episodes are dropping at DTBY Halton and at CYC for Change.
For having me.
So on that note, that concludes this episode of DTBY's Ask the Expert podcast. On behalf of DTBY, I would like to thank you for opening up about your journey to becoming a lawyer and giving students considering this field a little inside scoop of what potentially waits for them on their own journey. So thank you for coming again, and thank you to everyone who tuned in to this episode. You could follow us on social media to stay up to date on when new episodes are dropping at DTBY Halton and at CYC for Change.
For having me.
Cool.